Hey everyone. So this video is dedicated to um, telling you a little bit about how to craft your introductions and your conclusions for your speeches. So you should already have a good portion of the body of your speech done, and now it's time to figure out how you're going to open the speech and how you're going to close the speech. So starting off, you're going to want to figure out what you want to use for an attention getter. So for an attention getter, you could start off by using humor. You could start off by telling a joke, but make sure that the joke that you are sharing with us is relevant to the topic that you're going to be talking about. Typically, jokes for informative speeches work pretty well. For persuasive speeches that tend to be on more serious topics, not so much. Um, but humor can be great for informative speeches. So another thing you can do is to cite a startling fact or statistic, something that's going to get our attention immediately because of just how big a number is, or a statistic that you're sharing. You could use a quotation that's relevant or really helps to paint what you're about to talk about as your topic. You could ask us a question. That question could be direct or rhetorical. With direct questions, be careful that you don't take too much time when it comes to um, fielding answers from your audience. And rhetorical questions typically work better because they allow your audience to consider something, mull something over as you continue forward in the speech. Another very useful attention getter is to tell a story, tell a narrative, something that happened to you, something that happened to a specific person that is affected by whatever the topic is of your speech. It could be a hypothetical story, it could be a real story. And you don't have to, if it's a real story, you don't have to reveal that till the end in your conclusion that it was a real story, which is sometimes a pretty effective way to use a story within an attention getter. And finally, you can perform an action. Say you're doing a speech about how we use our eyes when it comes to hand-eye coordination. And so you start your speech by juggling. That would be a way to perform an action that gets our attention and is still relevant to the speech. So after you get our attention, you want to introduce, and you've introduced us to your speech, you want to let us know right from the get-go, what are we going to be talking about today? So an example that we can use is very clear and concise for an informative speech. Childhood obesity is a serious problem facing our country. So it's not, this thesis statement isn't asking us to do something, it's just asking us to recognize something. So it works for an informative thesis statement. But if you were doing a persuasive speech, you could kind of tweak that thesis statement a little bit so that you would say, today I'll persuade you that childhood obesity is a problem that can no longer be ignored. Or if you don't want to be so clinical and direct in saying, today I'll persuade you, because whenever somebody says, I'm going to persuade you, I say, yeah, you thought. Um, so if you want to avoid that kind of language, then you could say childhood obesity is a problem that can no longer be ignored and we must take action. That's basically saying, I'm going to persuade you that we need to take action on this subject. But the point of a thesis statement is to be as clear and as concise as possible. We want to know very early on what your speech is going to be about so that we know what to pay attention to. After we have told our audience what the speech is about, now we want to establish either our credibility or we want to illustrate the significance of this topic to our audience. Because when your audience is listening or when you're listening to a speech, we're often asking ourselves, so what? Why do I have to care? Why should I spend my time listening to this topic? What is its relevance to me? So this is your chance to answer that so what question preemptively. It's also your chance to illustrate your own experience or your own training expertise regarding this topic that you're going to be sharing with us. But essentially, you're illustrating to us why this subject is worth our time and worth your time, and why you felt compelled to speak about it. After you established why it's so relevant and important to talk about. Now you're going to tell us how we're going to talk about it. So you're going to give us a preview of your main points. You're going to let us know where's this speech headed. And this is also called signposting because much like signs posted on, say, a freeway, they let us know what's coming up, like what exits are coming up on a freeway, etc. In a speech, you're doing the same thing. You're letting us know what is coming ahead so that we are prepared for what we're about to be informed or persuaded on. Now, these main points should, the wording or the naming, labeling of them should be as concise as possible so that somebody can write down one or two words for each main point, and they have a pretty good outline of what your speech is about. And what is also very important is using language like first, second, and finally. So with a preview of your main points, say it's a persuasive speech, you would say, first, we'll talk about the problems. Next, look at the causes, before finally coming up with some solutions. And for an informative speech, you would use the same first, second, finally language, and whatever your main points are, followed by that. Now, for your conclusion, you're basically taking all of the stuff you did in the introduction and you're kind of working backwards. So you're going to review your main points by saying something like, today we looked at main point 1, main point 2, before finally main point 3, in order to get a better understanding of whatever your thesis statement is. Now, it was important for us to learn about this or for us to take action on this because this is how it's relevant, this is how many people it affects, etc. And the last thing you want to do is return to the attention getter. So whatever you started the speech with, find a way to come back to that in your conclusion in order to have this nice bookend to your speech so that it's kind of like, neatly packaged together. But it also works very well because it makes the ending of your speech memorable. So when it comes to introductions and conclusions, while there's not many components to them, they can be pretty integral to or pretty important to your success in terms of delivering an effective speech. So, take some time to actually work on your introductions and your conclusions to see how you can open the speech and close the speech in the most effective way possible. Other than that, if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, thanks for watching.